taken down by Shaggy 3-0, but this inspired Zeal deck is going to be the one we're going to keep our eyes on. The game is starting, Christo. We're ready. Let's go.
Let's do it. That inspired Zeal deck, which we're not going to see right just yet, is interesting to me because, you know, you saw Cams go the other direction playing the duelers and all of that, where this is commandos plus siege, a little bit more of the classic list we saw first happen when Voltes was released, kind of going that commando route. So I haven't seen it in tournament play much, even less so recently with Northern Realms taking a little bit of a backseat. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that we do get to see it today. But right now we've got Scoia'tael, that Alzur deck that you were talking about, Speci, and Alzur has done some work so far this tournament. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed so we see more excitement, things like Oneiromancy going and just setting Alzur off.
It's so much fun to watch Alzur for sure. I think definitely that some people don't love that Alzur can play for so many points without being answered, but whether you like that or not, there's no denying the excitement that happens when you see what Alzur can pull. Is it going to be a great sword, or is it going to be a Viper Witcher Mentor, which is, of course, just 1 point? There's a real disparity. And, okay, look, Gwent isn't a game with an abundance of RNG, but there's definitely a lot of fun to be had with cards like this.
Especially when I'm not the one playing the game. When I am casting and watching, I feel a whole lot better when something like Alchemist comes down and just absolutely ruins somebody's day. But from this side, I'm all about the RNG, all about the excitement, because at the end of the day, you know, the thing about Alzur specifically for me is he can be answered. He's 6 points. It's not impossible to go remove him before he does any damage. So that makes me feel a little bit better. You answer him or we start rolling the dice.
And here is the opening play from Wlastelin. A little bit unorthodox with a Gerd, followed by a Megascope. Now, Gerd cannot be copied with the Megascope, and I'm sure Wlastelin is aware of this. This is the same man, I do believe we saw poisoning a Dunker in the previous series against Shaggy. So,
Yes.
Seems as though he just doesn't really have any interest in committing to this round, but the fact that his lowest commitment is a 7 provision gold card is a little bit dodgy. You might think, but look, he's got a flipping Gutting Slash. Why not use that? Well, Gutting Slash, look, it's only 4 provisions, but removing these engines is so important when you've got cards like Whisperer, Sages, Sorceresses. So he's
exactly
just, he's going to be passing on 7, I think, is like the clear indication. And again, we've seen that so many times, Christo, like a lot more than I'm used to seeing.
Yeah, and I think you run into a situation where, and there's, to your point, Gutting Slash doesn't even come down. Using Barification instead, it does technically keep the point total close, but, you know, these players know exactly the matchups that they're running into, right? Sure, the Scoia'tael deck does play Alzur, and maybe that's not as common in the tournament scene, but they know they're going to have to deal with the Seers and the Sorceresses and all of that, so you know that, that removal is going to be key, and this Simless is coming down, going to set those orbs up, gonna put that Scribe up a bunch of points, and is this gonna be the pass that we expected from Wlastelin?
Yeah, and it's a pretty big commitment on paper. You've just committed a 12 provision gold card and you use a 8 provision tutor to find it, but it thins 2 bronzes from your deck and more importantly puts them in the graveyard, which of course Orbs of Insight, when combined with Simless, can be then chained with things like the Necromancy and moreover Alzur. So for example, you can use this ADC here to find Alzur, and then you're going to trigger these orbs straight away and get your Alzur value on the 6s, which again we know can be pretty scary 6s. Margarita, will we see her pop her head up? I'm still hoping for Count Caldwell, Chris, so I've got my fingers crossed for a bit of Count Caldwell action.
Well, and you know, you said it before, when Simless first came out on Council, I was like, oh man, that is a heck of a commitment knowing that your opponent wants to get out of the round. But in reality, that's exactly what you want, because you want to be able to set up that graveyard. So the orbs are set, you're going to be able to pull Alzur with your double cross, you're going to be able to set all of that off, and that is going to make for a tremendous bleed because of how quickly it tempos points out onto the board. I say that, I also mean theoretically how quickly it puts points out on the board. It can also spit you out a Mentor, like you said, that plays for 1 point. So it is a bit of a gamble, but that is how this deck works. It's getting bodies out, it's getting spells played, and it's finishing up with a big, thick gourd at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And PorkBelly here, starting off with the Sorceress. Now, Sorceress can play another spell card in theory. If she gets to 6 power or above, there is a chance she can play her own orb, which would mean that Alza would complete in a whole turn. But Wlastelin deciding Hjalmar is going to come down and remove this. Of course, double gutting slash available can deal up to 6 damage, but you do need 2 Bloodthirst on the board for that to be an option. And yeah, PorkBelly, he's still at 7 cards, so this is just not a commitment. If he wants to go to the long round, that is still an option. He can just pass after this. But Wlastelin has to respect these cards, because otherwise Wlastelin might just end up getting bled with a lot of tempo from something like Alza. Because look, the Sage is doing the same thing. You go Alza's double cross to find the man himself, Alza. You play the orbs from your graveyard, triggering your Alza, and you can also use an orb on the Seer rather, which is going to give you your complete Alza in just one turn, unanswerable. And that is the key difference between Alza now and Alza when we've seen him before. He gets value on deploy. That's why we see cards like Idaran being so popular when combined with Megascopes, because you get Idaran value on deploy. Will we see a leader charge? We will.
And you know what? Come to think of it, if you go and look at it the other way around, that's it. 9 or down to 7 cards. So got a gold card in Hjalmar out, got a leader charge out. Feels pretty decent. Definitely. On PorkBelly's side of things. And you still have all the tools necessary to continue that push in round 3, because you still have a Seer in hand, you still have a Sorceress in hand, and all of those are going to continue to, activate something like Alzur. And that's where Alzur on getting value on deploy is what makes the biggest difference. I was mentioning before how Alzur can typically be answered, but if it's set up properly, that is not the case. You do still have some interacting you can do. You can try and kill the Seer, you can try and kill the Sorceress, you can work through that. But it's definitely difficult to do, and it forces you constantly to answer and doesn't allow you to establish your own game plan.
Yeah, and the Simless commitment in round 1, while it looked like a huge commitment and wasn't going to trade efficiently, ultimately it did trade for a leader charge and this Hjalmar, because the threat of tempo that those orbs in the graveyard offered just meant that Wlastelin really had to respect these cards, or he knew that an Alza could come down for potentially 20 plus points, right? And that is not going to be easy to catch up with. So we go to a long round 3. Alza's still definitely a threat, but at least the tempo, you have an opportunity to catch up to the tempo Alza gives you, because you're not worrying about card advantage in round 3.
And you're also in a situation where Alzur is in hand, so again, you've now got to establish something like the Sorceress, have it stick on the board, being able to click it to go ahead and get that spell to finally trigger, as opposed to in the past where you can use something like Double Cross to go pull it out and have it all activate at once. PorkBelly also not playing Scenario here. Waylay is another way that players will sometimes use an elf to generate another spell. So there's some ways around it that we don't see here.
So these orbs are now just ticked down to 1, which means they are ready to go. However, Alza being in hand does mean that a Sorceress is going to have to be stuck on the board. Often you want to, use your ADC into your Alza, because then that just means that your orbs come out straight away. But by the time you play your Alza, you play the orbs, bang. So it's not as ideal as it should be here for PorkBelly, because he does have the Alza in hand, which you think is a good thing, but that's what the ADC is for. So will this Sorcerer stick? I imagine the answer is probably not, but it's not exactly going to be the easiest of solutions for Wlastelin. He could go for double leader charge. He could also go for his Junod with a leader charge.
And that's the problem. Going double leader charge means that Junod is a little bit harder to set off later in the game. So Junod maybe now is the answer. The problem there becomes, once Alzur hits the board, how do you remove Alzur?
Yeah, and that's exactly it. You've removed all the threats. You've removed the Sorceresses. You removed the Seer earlier on. But look, you still have to remove the Alzur itself. So actually, not even a problem here for PorkBelly that he can just play it from hand, because there's just no answer. The Bear Witches, while they're not even available in the hand for Wlastelin, PorkBelly's just not scared of them because their adrenaline condition has not been met. So leader charge, Bear Witcher isn't going to kill it, because Bear Witch is doing no damage. So he just looks, look, what can you do? Your Hjalmar's gone. I got rid of that. Your Gutting Slashes are both gone. I've got rid of those. So look, my Alza's happy and sound, and that means I can even go a Neuromancy into it. Mm-hmm. However, it is in the front row, Christo, and that means Kelly could be a thing off this Neuromancy.
Oh boy. So that's always the threat. That's always what you have to worry about as, it is a dice roll. We talk about high rolling and how exciting that can be, but you can also low roll, and people don't remember those moments quite as much, but they can be equally devastating when you pull something like Kelly. In the situation that PorkBelly is in, though, a lot of the cards that he's looking to establish on board are bodies. So, you do potentially run into the situation if Alzer spits out two or three units. That Kelly is scary to have on the board. So I wonder if that was something that was, thought out on PorkBelly's side, or PorkBelly just decided, hey, I'm not really concerned about it. Who cares? We'll just let this happen as time goes on. There's that Quen on Wlastelin's side. That's nice to pull here.
Yeah, and the Sunset Wanderer's body for Wlastelin does mean that he doesn't go for the Kelly, finds an Elderbear off 6, finds the Sarah! It's incredible, the Sarah synergy with all the spells. The lesser spotted Godling comes through, and instant value on deploy. Sarah already playing for 6 points, but just another engine. Look at the amount of specials available.
That was 20 points just from that, plus all the Sarah boosts that can come down. But 20 points off of Alzer and a Pact, essentially. That is wild here. And Wlastelin's been spending so much time trying to answer the things that PorkBelly's been doing that, again, trying to establish points is going to be tough because that Heat Wave, for example, answers the Wanderers very cleanly. We've got Rebukes. We have got a Forest Protector. We still have a No Narrowmancy to go get whatever PorkBelly wants, and the leader charge. So this is going to be a lot of points to come down. And I don't know if Wlastelin is going to be able to pull this off based on what he's got right now on the board.
And as the rebuke comes through, Sarah continues to buff the Alza, which is a little bit of a problem because that is a reset option for Wlastelin. So Sarah being a little bit devious and boosting the Alza that summoned her. And I think this Elderbear as well is in fact the third or fourth, I think it might be the fourth best option from Alza off a 4-roll. You can hit the On-El Conqueror at 4 provisions, which is 7. Also the new Scapegoat from Syndicate, as well as the Fish Flapper. I believe they are the only 7s. There's also another one in Syndicate, so maybe the 5th best possible card. Not bad at all for a 4-roll, especially with Sarah as well. Quite exciting.
Yeah, that could not, I don't think, have gone better. Again, you talk about high rolling things, but not low rolling things is important too. And landing perfectly in the middle is still a great return of points for provisions. And that's exactly what we see come down here. Quen's going to get that Bear Witcher as per usual. But let's keep in mind, leader hasn't been used yet, and that Oneiromancy is going to go grab us a big, thick gourd at the end of the day, which I can only imagine is going to be worth a few points.
Yeah, and absolutely. We talked about the Oneiromancy being an option for Alza. Usually, in the past, it's been a no-brainer that you would try and go for this if you can at all help it. But obviously here, Gourd being summoned from the Oneiro means that you want to save that. And also, with the Sunset Wanderers being 13 provisions most recently, you can low roll your Oneiromancy. Previously it was minimum 7, but the fact you can roll a 1 now, it doesn't make as much sense to force it through. Sarah continues to tick along, no leader necessary, still winning by 12 points with an abundance of power from the leader. And we get this off and running with PorkBelly striking first. Wlastelin, we've not seen him win a single game yet, and loses again with the Skellige deck, which was the bane of his matchup against Skellige.
And so we've got Wlastelin on blue here, going with the Northern Realms, the commando list that we have not we've not seen yet. So this will be a first, and we got Foltest in hand. We have Defender in hand. All we're really missing is a commando, and if Wlastelin can get that, he'll have all the pieces he needs to go and start setting up here. So I wonder if this is another situation where, PorkBelly just tries to jam a couple cards and get out. Though we do see Vilgefortz in hand, and that might be one way to get through the Defender. Yeah,
absolutely. The Vilgefortz is huge, but it doesn't look like there's any other ways. In fact, you can just get through the Defender and you can lock the Foltest with your leader ability. So Vilgefortz coming in clutch here. Invo would be the other way. You don't really want to include a Purifier in this deck. Previously, you'd see things like the Cupbearer, or there's also the 5 Provision Purifier. The problem with the 5 Provision Purifier is it dilutes your Vigo, and we've seen how important Vigo into a Informant or into even an Emissary can be. But this Vilgefortz is offering a lot of value here. It's actually saving the day, because if this Defender Foltest goes unanswered, Wlastelin's probably winning the game. And look, there's no Commandos in hand. But who needs Commandos in hand when you draw your Defender, you draw your Foltest, and you have a Cursed Scroll?
Correct. That cursed scroll has made all the difference. I do like this opening play, though.
Yep.
Let's go ahead and give me that defender as an option. The beauty of using your leader ability to answer with Vilgefortz is you can do it all in one turn.
Absolutely.
So you're in no rush to answer this right now.
And of course, there is the other thing we have to wait and see. What will Vilgefortz mill from Wlastelin's deck? Could it be a gold card? Could it be something like an Onsace, which could give him some extra value? Or could it even just be a rubbish bronze card and almost work as a bit of thinning? Pavetta is also a possibility, Christo. Imagine that we see the Pavetta get milled by Vilgefortz. It might be the best Vilgefortz of all time.
That is something I did not even think about. I was on the same page as you, considering, hey, what could you pull that could maybe be problematic? But in this case, it could be ugly. I do like the direction, again, that Wlastelin's taking here, where if you do answer the defender, well, you can't just straight up lock the full test. So full test at this point will at least get one turn of action before being answered.
Yeah, and just a proactive turn adjust. No shield available due to the Veil, but just 4 points. Little stalling turn, knowing that Wlastelin's fall test is going to be ready to go. Now, will Wlastelin decide to click this command? He doesn't. Here it comes. Will we see the Pavetta, Christo? What a big moment here.
Drum roll, please. Nope.
We don't. That's a bit anticlimactic, and the Ballista is a great thing for Wlastelin to find, because not only has it essentially thinned a 4 provision card from his deck, meaning that he's going to improve his draws, because this was right on top of his deck. This was the top card. That's what Vilgefortz does. But he's also got the 2 points off the order. So Vilgefortz working as a tool punish, minus 5 points basically here.
But at the end of the day, if you don't make that play, if you do not answer the defender and you do not take care of that full test, you are pretty much conceding the game. It's very difficult to come back from a row full of commandos that can pop out in a short round, essentially on one card. So you have to make that play. You know, what came out, and in this case, it wasn't the end of the world. It wasn't the best case scenario, but hey, you've got to make those plays. You've got to get through it, and you go on to round 2 and hope that you can find another way to answer these commandos.
And very much sticking with the theme of the day, the Nilfgaardian player on the red coin passes on 7. It's really fascinating to see how often this is happening in the current meta. It's definitely something we have seen a lot, but I've never casted a tournament that has had as many passes on 7 here. And it's, again, Nilfgaard, the red dream line from sort of a few seasons ago. I think he popularized this, or at least many players might have done it, but red dream, definitely the player that I associate it with most, because Nilfgaard just has always had such good long rounds, and you put the ball in the court of your opponent to make the decisions. You can try and get ahead and then win round 3 up a card, or if they decide to pass, you feel confident that you're just going to win that long round.
And it was challenging for PorkBelly as well, because knowing, hey, I have to answer this full test, but also if you look at the hand, I could have dropped some Blight Makers, but the remedy is not particularly great at this point. It is going to be good to start pulling commandos out of the graveyard, though. So having a few turns to maybe do that could be interesting. Here we see Siege come down as Wlastelin's whole game plan here is to play as far into this round as possible, keep a nice short round 3 where you have Pavetta come out, shuffle the cards back, and or shuffle the commandos back, and then you play into a short round 3. Here we have the Informant pulling a Trebuchet out of their own, but I wonder why PorkBelly has decided to drop that Bradden's on the back row.
I was wondering the same thing, but then as soon as I realized he's going for the Informant, the Trebuchet's locked to the back as well, right? So I guess he's just trying to split up his engines, making them harder to remove for his opponent. There is a bit of a problem for Wlastelin, and that this assault is pulling his only available siege card. However, the reinforcements is the other way for him to play another siege. However, if this is answered by something like an Invo, which isn't the most obvious play for PorkBelly, it does mean that this final chapter will not be completed, because of course Adalia, there's no available siege engines in hand. So quite an interesting moment. It would be very, very surprising to see PorkBelly take that line, because you always expect that there's just going to be another one, right?
Yeah, exactly, because siege engines are dime a dozen. You can absolutely go and jam them, but you can reinforce any of the other ones as well.
So the Invo wouldn't even stop it, right? So the reinforcements is nice and safe after all.
But the challenge here is, and there's the lock coming down the second leader charge, and I think that makes perfect sense. The problem becomes, once you drop that next siege engine, there is going to be a lot of damage swinging to the other side of the board, and that could potentially do a pretty nice job of cleaning up what PorkBelly is currently established here. And, while I was talking about doing things like going ahead and using Remedy, let's say to pull commandos out of the grave to make the later rounds worse, you still need to win this round. So you can't go just being creative, trying to do fun things. You need to get points on the board. You need to do it quick.
Yeah, and this is the power of Siege. This is like the life coach kind of take on these Northern Realms Commandos decks. Really fascinating to see it in action so many months down the line. I'm sure there's a few tweaks here and there, but going down the Devotion Commandos route, having less consistency, less megascopes, well, no megascopes to make more commandos, but what you do get as a result is more points if you draw your cards well, and Wlastelin is doing a great job here of showing the power of this Commandos deck when the cards are drawn. Furthermore, the reinforcements, really a nice inclusion in this deck. You can use it in round 1 for more commandos, but also just guaranteeing through your siege here was a really nice tool. Of course, it's a warfare card, so you can pull it through John, as well as triggering your resupply cards, which in this case are going to be the reinforced ballistas.
It just works so nicely hand in hand with everything you have going on. And yeah, being able to pull, user reinforcements on the scout, which then makes you another commando. It can essentially play for, 8 points and a carryover of 4 more as well if you play it early. So there's so much flexibility to be had there, so much that you can do with it. And here we're going to see, I would imagine, the Informant being copied here, getting another siege engine out on the board. There's that Trebuchet, just going to continue to ping damage every single turn. But, Wlastelin still has the engines on the board, is going to be able to pull back the, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name of it, but that
the
one
battering ram.
Change. The battering ram, there you go. It's got to go back and forth. It's a battering ram.
Yeah, I love that change they've made
to use that again.
It's quite a recent change, isn't it? The battering ram flip-flopping between the front row and back row, which is, again, very thematic. I love these kinds of additions to the game, but it is just a 3-point game. However, no leader ability available for PorkBelly. He does, however, have an abundance of gold cards, and for Wlastelin, he didn't exactly get the world's most commandos in round 1, and that's why Foltest is so important to answer. I'm sure there's quite a few commandos available in his graveyard, but imagine that Foltest just lasted that little bit longer on the board. This round 3 for Wlastelin would pretty much be unwinnable if even down a card. But the fact that Foltest was answered means that round 3, no matter how short it is not going to be guaranteed for Wlastelin to win, and PorkBelly is going to try and continue to get ahead here. Furcart coming in is going to draw a card. Let's have a look at what's going to be. It's going to be a Tourney Joust, which isn't exactly fantastic.
I mean, your Tourney Joust, at least in this case, will answer, let's say, the Trebuchet, so it is turning off an engine, theoretically, but that battering ram going to come back to the front. I don't remember, I know it's Specie at one point you said that Wlastelin did not click his commandos. Are there any left in the deck? I imagine there aren't, otherwise Roach would have been played by now. Yeah,
I'm honestly not sure either, right? But in this Devotion deck, your only access to guaranteed commandos and Pavetta in the same turn is if you need to have your Assault or your Roach, right? That's another benefit that the non-Devotion one has, because you have your Aneromancy. Whereas here, if you have to go Assault for Pavetta, for example, and Pavetta's on top. Now, Cantarella and Alchemist steal the Pavetta Cristo. Oh no, it's happening. It's happening.
Did we see Wlastelin click the Pavetta?
I'm pretty sure. Oh, he doesn't go for it! But the Cantarella can still take it. He doesn't know that it's on top because the Adrenaline has been achieved. But the Cantarella is not enough points to steal the Pavetta here. You have to go for a different card. Assault is a problem though, but with Roach still in hand, Pavetta and Roach means that the commandos can still be cycled. The Invo on the Ballista means Assault is an option. There's so many big brain plays going on here, and this should be enough with the Assimilate. It is by a couple of points. Wow, that was a roller coaster. That's a massive roller coaster.
By 1 point. That was enough by 1 point. Again, that big brain math. I was just flabbergasted, not exactly knowing what was happening. That AA comes back again. So that's a big part of it, right? That AA being stolen is just about as bad, except for the fact that Roche exists and can do 2 damage to pull commando.
Christo, he didn't put Pavetta on top after all. We got baited, and he doesn't have her yet. He has 1 mulligan left, 3 cards remaining, and he doesn't even find it. Oh. The threat of the Cantarella, the threat of the Alchemist that weren't taken enough there to stop Wlastelin putting the Pavetta on top after all. And that is a real problem for him because he just doesn't have access to the Pavetta anymore. What
And
a
that
roller coaster
Dawnamir-
of emotions.
That Dawnamir with the coming out being copied would also have put him in a situation where that Roach couldn't have hit anything anyway. So the Roach wouldn't have been able to do it. So there was no actual way to get commandos back, even if you did AA into Pavetta if you didn't draw it. I am so confused right now. What a play by, Wlastelin assuming that my Pavetta will get stolen, so I'm not going to put it there.
Yeah.
PorkBelly saying, I'm not even going to bother trying because that's not enough points for me. I need to get ahead here. And this is what it's turned into. A couple bronze cards that aren't going to do a whole heck of a lot. And a Roche who can't kill anything.
Yeah, it's been an absolute roller coaster. Of course, Wlastelin, I think it's fair to say, probably made the correct decision with the threat of Alchemist and the threat of Cantarella.
Yes.
They weren't taken, and he just hoped upon hope that he would draw the cards. And this is also really interesting because, he had the option of taking the Runestone there, which would have triggered his Assimilate cards twice, right? So I'm a little bit surprised to see that he goes for the Pikeman here. That would have been a rare opportunity for a Runestone in Nilfgaard, double Assimilate trigger and all those sorts of things. But it's just not going to matter. The experimental remedy comes through. Can probably even steal a Commando because you don't even need to, right? Because you know Pavetta plus Roach can't be on the menu here. Roach double leader charge does mean commandos can come through. It's a 24-point gap.
We were so stuck on the fact that commandos could have been, the Pavetta could have been stolen. We didn't even think about how crippling stealing AA would be. And in this case, that is what absolutely cost Wlastelin the game. So incredible heads up play by PorkBelly there.
Yep.
Again, we talked about how, PorkBelly is a newer player that we haven't seen really play very much, but
a great opportunity to make Masters at the end of the year. Neither of these players can get through to the Masters on crown points. People like Cams, Shaggy, Spybee, and Wanged as well, Wang ID, all going for that on crown points, I do believe, if I'm not mistaken. They're the four that are sort of gunning for it. But these two, crown points aren't an option for them, so they need to qualify for Open 4, win Open 4 to get to Masters. And yeah, Wlastelin back against the wall. This time, he decides to queue his SK on the opposite coin, which I think we can agree is probably a wise decision.
And exactly, learning from, potentially their mistakes in that series against Shaggy, where this mirror matchup was flipped and didn't feel so great when you're on blue coin playing this mirror. So going to take it on red coin instead. There is a truckload of potential drawing and discarding to be done on PorkBelly's side. We see both of the skirmishers. We've got the stratagem, we've got Coral, and we've got two of the Haymays. So lots to draw and discard on that side to gather that tempo, because you said it before, Speci, round control in this matchup can be important. So we'll have to see how this plays out and if this is going to be enough tempo to stay ahead, because the hand is full of bronze cards. So the draws are going to be important as well.
Yeah, and we start off with a couple of Raging Bears again. While it's only an 8 for 5, we sort of see that more a competitive thing, a competitive number at this sort of stage in the game is more like a 9 for 5. Often, what the Raging Bear does offer is a lot of proactivity for 8 points, and it's definitely something these SK decks struggle with, so no surprise to see that. As well as also opening up the Megascopes earlier in the round. We saw with Great Swords before, okay, you're paying an extra provision, but you're getting 2 extra points on the Great Sword and also on the Megascope. But they come in at 4 points. You don't want to be committing these leader charges in round 1, and they've sort of shooed away the Great Sword despite having the potential of a 10-point Megascope.
Exactly. We were talking about it before, having that flexibility, having the ability to really save those leader charges for when you need them, whether that's to remove an engine, set up your Junod, whatever the case may be. So having to use them proactively just feels bad when you're dumping them into a situation where, well, I just have to use this, otherwise my Greatsword dies, and then I can't drop the Megascope on it and all of that. So here we see another play 3 cards and pass, this time from PorkBelly, probably not liking this mirror matchup on blue, and decides we're going to spin it around and make Wlastelin still have to play for a good amount of points, and potentially have the Wanderers come out. So that's what it's going to be. Can we do this in 1 card is the question.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting line. Often in these mirror matchups, we do see the person going first lose on even. But you can remove that being a possibility by taking this earlier pass on 7. Now, for Wlastelin, he wants to win the round, but he doesn't want to go to a long round. which is really, really interesting. He wants to bleed, so he actually commits a leader charge. So if we look at this, we think that Wlastelin has the advantage going second, but he wins the round at the cost of a leader charge. Was that worth it? We'll have to wait and see.
Exactly. That just kind of spins it on its head, right? We saw PorkBelly being able to use Maxi, so has taken a look at what the draws are going to look like. Feels good. Drew through the stratagem as well as one of the Haymays. Let's also keep in mind the fact that the Wanderer is further to the left in PorkBelly's hand as well, though we do see the Axie on the other side as a great potential answer for that. So there's a few different things that are going to come into play during this bleed. So I'm not as familiar with this mirror matchup in a tournament setting. So I'm curious to see how deep we're going to bleed here and what's going to go on.
Yeah, and with Wlastelin committing this leader charge, he could have just taken it, right? He could have won the round without the leader charge, but having to play more cards. It strongly suggests that he is looking to bleed here. And what is really interesting is, because he's played a couple of more cards, this Sunset Wanderers is further in the right of Wlastelin's hand compared to PorkBelly, which means this bleed is going to get that little bit of extra tempo, potentially, for Wlastelin here, which could just be the reason he decided to commit that leader charge, because this little bit of extra tempo could trade quite efficiently overall. And it's a really interesting decision from Wlastelin to take the leader charge, and definitely suggests the bleed is very much in his mind here.
Exactly, and that's what you're gonna have to imagine. But again, Wlastelin's in a situation where, okay, that Haymay helped out a little bit, but you don't want to play Maxi because Maxi's on the end of your hand. There's not a lot of proactivity there. So you're kind of limited in that scenario. And then we see PorkBelly playing around keeping the Wanderers as much as possible. So, being able to wait till next turn, the Scald is going to be to the left of the Wanderer. It's going to draw an additional card. So really making sure that there's a lot of runway for that Wanderer, gain as much value as possible. But that Axie is going to make short work of it and can potentially make short work of it on both sides, as PorkBelly does have an Axie as well. However, I do not believe it is in hand. Can't see it because of the decisions that are being made here, but that is potentially a big swing where something like a Wanderers that is 8, 9, 10 points comes down and you don't really have a great answer for it.
And here's Maxi from Wlastelin. He's still at that 7 card mark, so he does have the option of passing. However, if he does decide to pass, it's a little bit weird that he did commit that leader charge in round 1. So still definitely all eyes on Wlastelin. And his Sunset Wanderers has travelled. Geralt and Dandelion have travelled to the edge of the world, but there comes the pass. I'm a bit surprised as to why he's going therefore into this round down a leader charge. I definitely think that last say is going to be valuable. It's not even necessarily last say; it's more that you don't have first say because of the struggles you have with proactivity in this particular deck. But with Raging Bear, Xavier, there are some options. Also, the Bearification could be used as some sort of thing. But yeah, really interesting to consider. Does chat have any ideas why Wlastelin decided to go for the leader charge in round 1 if he's not going to bleed? Maybe just because he gave the threat of a bleed and he made some efficient trades, but it does just seem like it might have been a better option for him to just play a couple more cards, save the leader charge, and then just play Maxi down at 7, and then you just pass the long round. You have 3 extra points and a leader charge, right? So definitely be interested to see if those 3 points make the difference, because it's not just 3 points, Crystal, either, right? The leader charge is a bit of flexibility, a bit of removal, setting up Junod, all these sorts of things.
Exactly. So there's a lot that leader charge can do. I'm also interested. So PorkBelly had actually mulliganed Hjalmar in round 2. Went ahead and found Hjalmar on the last mulligan here. So that was something else that I thought was quite interesting. There's the Wanderers coming down, and again, Axie probably going to be able to do some work here. But both players have a lot of control in hand. You've got the Axie, you've got the Heatwave, you've got the Junod. There's a lot that is going to come down. There's a lot that's going to be done here. So it's going to be all about the sequencing. Having to play first and letting your opponent respond might be the difference maker finally around how this kind of game plays out. I do like the PorkBelly drop the totem. Hasn't clicked anything, knowing that those leader charges will eventually come through, and right now it's going to eat a bunch of armor and probably flip some bears. So that is a safe direction to take. Also have Trial of the Grasses in hand. So that's something that could be interesting on a Quen, could be interesting on the Axie if need be. And, that plays around Junod, doesn't play around Axie, but Axie can't answer everything. So that Heatwave will probably have to come into play for whatever that second boosted card is.
Yeah, and we do see the Axie down on the board as well. We talked about before, Morkvarg does give you that one little extra bit of damage, but of course Axie, a lot more flexible. But this is a chance for the Trial of the Grasses to really shine. The Trial of the Grasses can kill Coral. There's not that many opportunities to kill any engine type cards with this Trial, but instead goes for the Hjalmar, and I think this might... I guess you're just saying that I'd rather use the Trial on my own cards. The opportunity for to Trial the Coral was definitely... reasonable, but I guess as well, Axie on Sunset Wanderers. Sunset Wanderers, I do believe, has the Witcher tag because it is Geralt and Dandelion, so you could then use the Trial to put your Sunset Wanderers back at 12, and that's pretty exciting. I think that's what we're about to see here. The Trial of the Grasses tech coming through and putting in some serious value. No leader charge for Wlastelin to try and play around that just yet.
And that's the thing, right? So Hjalmar answers the engine. There's really no other engines on Wlastelin's side. So you don't feel bad about, let's say, you know, keeping Hjalmar or not keeping Hjalmar and using the Trial of the Grasses instead, because that's going to give you, again, more flexibility typically. Hjalmar wasn't going to get you much more than 6 points of value. Yeah, it could have maybe gotten you 2 more somewhere. In reality as well, I wish I had gone back and I don't remember how many draw cards Wlastelin has used, if they played the Scalds or whatever, and if there was actually more discard to come through to give Coral value or not. I mean, I imagine PorkBelly has been proactive enough to think that one through, but I don't know if in this situation you think to yourself, hey, I'm going to get a lot of value out of Coral. Maybe that is the answer, or maybe it isn't. I'm not entirely sure at that point.
Yep, and Baron Grimmy in the chat making a couple of nice points. Maybe Wlastelin didn't bleed in round 2 because he just didn't have the hand to bleed. Sometimes you want to, but you just don't have the hand to do so. And that's why he used the leader charge. He felt his odds on winning this matchup were better if he bled, but he just didn't have the hand to. And also the decision not to click Coral, while that could be 2 points lost, there was so much armor and things like that on the board. And Quen is definitely... I've definitely seen Quens being bricked in this SK deck in the past, where something like a Coral or a Scald draws into the last Bear Witcher. So Gerd comes through. The Quen is also ready to go, and I would imagine that the totem will now be clicked because a Bear Witcher would otherwise clean up one of these fanatics.
And that's a great point. Quen very often can be bricked, especially when you're running Sunset Wanderers, because the Wanderers will go and, you know, draw whatever the top card off of your deck is, let's say, and that could very easily be your last Bear Witcher. So you've got to be very, very careful about that situation, because playing a 2-point Quen feels really, really bad when you've saved that as one of your big point plays at the end of the round. So you've got to be careful about that. Wlastelin could have been in a situation where, yeah, they wanted to bleed. That's why you spend the charge. It also gives you the flexibility of deciding if you do or don't want to bleed a little bit later on. And sometimes these matchups get decided by somebody being able to pivot and make that change in, let's say, round 2, starting to bleed, getting a couple cards out from your opponent and feeling like, hey, I've done enough so far. I don't need to keep rolling. And you can take that pass at that point. Yeah,
and here... PorkBelly, which is a great name, by the way. It really is a great name. I think we have to take a moment to appreciate what a great name that is. He did have the option of clicking, or they, I don't actually know if it's a man or a woman, so I should not assume. They could have clicked the totem, but the Quartermaster instead was an option from the Kadooch, clicking both of them twice, damaging them down, and it also doesn't put a Bear Witcher on the board, which is going to be a lot worse against Junod, but also it gives lower strength Witchers, which means this Trial of the Grasses can play for more points if you don't want to use it on Quen.
Exactly. So that's going to be able to give you a bigger boost there. Was there a possibility to drop the Heron? I know it's minimal. It's 1 point, but hey, 1 point sometimes matters. Dropping that Heron between the Quartermaster and the Siren and giving that Siren a little bit of love.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there was. So if 1 point, if it comes down to 1 point, that could be why. It's a pretty close game. 5 points. There for Wlastelin is 3 golds available, 2 for PorkBelly, but a leader charge advantage for PorkBelly, so it is looking close. Heatwave is going to play for 10 points. Often in these sorts of matchups, it doesn't really seem to do too much. Or in fact, it could even play for 12, right? Because of the Trial of the Grasses. And there is the totem clicked. Wlastelin still 3 points down, but here comes his verification. And he does take the lead, but is down a leader charge.
Now you're going to have to go, I imagine you go Quen next, trying to save that Trial of the Grasses for last play, hoping maybe that Heatwave doesn't come down and answer it. again, open deck list, you probably have a pretty good idea of what you're facing, so you're going to try and make that decision accordingly. And looking like Quen comes down, those leader abilities, depending on where they ping off, should give you a good amount of value. Worst case, probably hitting one of those abominations in the back row. So there's a lot of work still to be done here, but it might just not be enough from PorkBelly to be able to get out of this game and close out this series. Wlastelin's probably feeling pretty good, assuming these pings go the way that that they would like.
Exactly. All eyes on the leader. Imagine a situation where all 6 leader charges end up on this bear and Junod is just going to pay for 7 points. That could make the difference. It's unlikely, but it could happen. So all eyes on the leader charges. Of course, leader charges hitting the Witcher students as well would just give the Trial of the Grasses a little bit more value. So I'd imagine that we do see the leader first and then the heat wave save for the trial, but we could also just see the heat wave played first just to be a little bit more safe.
That would make an absolute huge difference as well, right? Because Junod can answer things that have been trialed of the grasses, because that's going to put out a big green number. So this decision here could also be game changing. We're going to see the heat wave come down first. Now, still up by a good amount of points, so this may not be enough, but this 12-point Witcher student cannot be answered now. So we're going to see those pings go off, do some work, and we're going to have to come back on.
Junod is 12 points, so it hits the Bear Witcher, that's going to do it. It also hits one of the Bear Abominations and the Quen, I think, the Axie. I think all of these were enough points. There was a very, very small chance that all the leader charges could be sunk into pretty bad things, and it could have been a little bit closer than that. But Wlastelin does take it. This leader charge he used in round 1, not proving to be a problem. And again, I think this just shows maybe also remove the Amphibious Assault. If left unanswered, that's going to be a real problem. So that is a threat that PorkBelly is going to have to respect. Let's have a look at the opening hands, because these can often make all the difference. We see a Roach. We see no Defender, no Fall Test just yet. You can go Assault for the Defender, and there is access to the Axie, but it is through Quen, which is not ideal. There's also no Heat Wave available just yet, but Trial of the Grasses can kill Fall Test unless a leader charge is used on Fall Test to protect it from Trial. So lots of interesting decisions. We do see the Axie, but down on the bottom we are still missing the Fall Test and the Defender, but Assault is an option to pull the Defender, so all the pieces of the puzzle are available. You're just going to have to commit Assault for it, which is not ideal.
No, it's not ideal, and also for the fact that you need to then save that Assault likely for, let's say, round 3 to pull your commandos again. So spending one now just pretty much removes that card from the game. And as we saw previously, if PorkBelly can find their Xavier Lemons, for example, and let's say remove that card, then you're in trouble. You don't have that scenario right now unless Coral goes and draws it for you. So again, there is a lot of moving pieces in both of these hands that can continue to do different things. The AA is going to grab Donamir, and as PorkBelly in this scenario, you're going to pretty much have to purify that immediately, for fear of it taking too long to answer the Full Test otherwise, because at this rate, Full Test should at least be able to get 1 copy off, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and for PorkBelly here, doesn't have the Heat Wave to answer Fault Test, but does have leader charges, does have a Gutting Slash, which if he can find a couple of hits, can get Bloodthirst and do 6 damage, and also the Trial of the Grasses can set, if Fault Test is 6 power or less, can set its power to 0 essentially. So it's going to be really interesting to see how exactly PorkBelly decides to approach this. It's almost inevitable that he's going to have to purify the Defender here. While it feels quite bad, that is just the power of Fault Test that you really do have to remove it. Here does come Axie, and then Fault Test is going to be put into Wlastelin's hand. He's going to put a card on the bottom of his deck with his Cursed Scroll, and then the Fault Test is going to come in, and we're going to have to see how PorkBelly decides to deal with it. If Wlastelin doesn't leader charge the Fall Test, then there is the option of Trial of the Grasses. If he does take the leader charge, then PorkBelly's going to have to commit some of his own leader charges to answer Fall Test.
So that was something that I was wondering as well. You know, using the leader charge on the commando, didn't feel exceptionally necessary in this situation because I don't know if you could answer the defender and the commando at once. And I wonder if saving that leader charge and dropping it onto full test, knowing that Junod is an option, for example, for removal, that will put that out of range. Trial of the Grasses is an option that would technically put it out of range unless you start committing leader charges. So I wonder if there was ever a mindset there where maybe saving the charge and putting it onto full test instead might have been a bit safer. We're going to see the charge on full test anyway. So this is going to be just a question of having to spread out some of those pings and hoping that one hits full test.
Does it? He hits the full test a couple of times, and the Trial of the Grass is coming in absolutely huge here. Not only did it force a second leader charge from Wlastelin to protect it and play around it, but it still wasn't enough. Okay, it did force a leader charge, but full test is gone, and that means that Wlastelin has got a lot of work to do. It's definitely far from over, but you have to answer the full test. You just do.
Exactly. You have no other choice. And again, if you're PorkBelly, you're on red coin. So you can say, I've answered full test. I've shut down this problem for now. We're going to deal with that later. I'll take the pass right now. 4 commandos, not the end of the world. Let's move on. Now it becomes, can I deal with siege? Because that's the next problem. And I don't see a heat wave in hand. So that is going to potentially be a challenge in the second round.
And look, we've seen this full test deck not perform so well thus far, but we've also seen in both games the full test and defender be answered, and that is not always going to happen. You have to draw the right cards. In the Nilfgaard game, we saw Vilgefortz plus the imprisonment leader charge to just clean up the defender and the full test in one turn. And in this situation, the Purifier was drawn and a removal tool was drawn. If those tools were not drawn for PorkBelly, the chances are he was losing the game. And that is why personally, Christo, full test, not a big fan of, I have to admit. But it is Northern Realms, but it's definitely my least favorite Northern Realms deck. I quite enjoy seeing full test get answered, I have to admit.
It's so polarizing, right? Because if he cannot be answered, then you pretty much win the game. If he is answered, you lose the game. And when you're in an open deckless scenario, your opponent knows exactly what they're looking for to try and answer that. So in the case that we saw where PorkBelly was playing Vilgefortz, without that Vilgefortz in round 1, that game could have potentially gotten out of hand very quickly. The other problem with that scenario is, well, I had to use my AA to get Donamir, I had to use my Curse Scroll to get full test, and I play all of those cards just to have them answered essentially immediately. So it's a little bit challenging because you commit so much to essentially bully your opponent out of the round, but you don't get that carryover you're hoping for that really makes the difference.
Yeah, and we do very much have a game here because full test has been answered. It is very much still up for grabs. It is far from over. The siege from Wlastelin coming down again. He's done a very good job of drawing the cards, but the coral coming in like a sniper in the sky, just cleaning up that trebuchet.
That cannot feel very good, but it is done, and that's what happens. Thankfully, you're going to put a shield on this one, so you're going to feel a little bit better about having the ballista out. Xavier Lemons is drawn. Unfortunately, Lemons comes down a little bit late because those commandos are already safely tucked into the deck. But that also goes to counteract what we were talking about before. Having to use your AA to get Donamir out in round 1 could make things a bit awkward in round 3, where you're trying to get them out. You have to save your AA for that. But now, between Roche and the ability to draw your commandos, you feel a little bit better.
And Wlastelin, again, just making use of this devotion version. He doesn't have to invest 13 provisions for a pesky Neuromancy when he can just draw all his cards. And he is doing a great job of showing the power of this life coach-esque Northern Realms Commandos deck. He's drawn the siege both times, but look, he is still 8 points down. His scenario has been completely triggered, and there is still a Sunset Wanderers available for PorkBelly. It looks like he's going to be going into round 3, down a card possibly, but at the very least, he is going to be shortening this round and hoping that his commandos can pull him through.
We only saw, 4 commandos, I believe. So while 16 points off of 1 click is not too bad at all, it still is somewhat limited versus what you might see otherwise. Having Quen pull a Bear Witcher, for example, plays for 13. That's not far off. So I don't think that it's a guarantee. Not using the leader charge. Obviously cannot really commit it here. So you're going to have to eat probably a Bear Witcher on your Selkirk. That's going to be a pretty weak duel going through.
Yeah, and the fact that we saw both leader charges committed by Wlastelin in round 1 to play around the Trial of the Grasses is actually just so huge. Not only is it points carryover, it just makes things a lot more awkward for Wlastelin to get his commandos out. If he wants to use Vernon Roach to thin his commandos, he is going to need to find that death blow. Is it possible he ever even decides to go for that now? I'm honestly just not sure the best path forward for Wlastelin here, because he is in a bit of a sticky situation that he does kind of just need this death blow with Vernon Roach in round 3, which is not going to be that easy to set up for the moment. Unsurprisingly, he's going to thin his deck with his John Natalis, going for a what's this card called? It's called a I can't remember.
Bombardment?
Bombardment, that's the one, yeah. The bombardment comes through, the resupply comes through, but look, he's just kind of stalling at this point. He's going to want to keep his golds. I also just like this play from him to commit the Pavetta early, because that has just nullified the value of Xavier, and also means it's not an engine that he has to answer. With no assault, no commandos in the graveyard, he has just been able to protect all his carryover at this point.
Exactly. So you had to go and you had to answer. Sorry, you just had to keep committing cards here, because in reality, you're never catching up. You're not going to commit your golds in this scenario, because even committing AA at this point won't really catch you up. And you're going to start trading down. Trading, Natalis into bombardment, you were all set. But at this point, you're going to be trading down anything you play. And that's going to be a challenge here. So you're probably looking at the pass. You're probably not looking at as short a round as you would typically like. When you're playing commandos.
Yeah, and I think the key thing here is it's going to be all eyes on the Roche, because you're going to want to try and find that death blow so that you can just use your leader charge on the commando. Otherwise, you might end up having to go assault for a commando to get them out, because, of course, 2 leader charges can be used on Roach. You can use a leader charge to summon the commando and just skip the death blow, and then use a leader charge on him, on the commando as well. But without that death blow, that's going to be a struggle. And finding a 2-strength card is going to be easier said than done, but it draws the commando. So the death blow situation, not going to be as important, but I don't think that is what he was hoping to do, Wlastelin. Of course, Pavetta puts some on the bottom. So this commando has appeared. Oh, no, Pavetta just shuffles them back in.
Shuffles them in.
Yeah, Pavetta shuffles them back in. I don't think this is what Wlastelin was hoping for, but it does also just mean he can be free to assault wherever he fancies.
Exactly. So it gives you the flexibility now. If you don't find the death blow, it's okay. If you don't find the commando, it's okay. Here we see commando popping straight out, coming out. So we're set up here with the biggest point total that Wlastelin can play on tempo, and the Megascope is going to compete with that pretty nicely. 2 leader charges still left on PorkBelly's side. The only thing I have to keep in mind, there's a Heyme Scald there that's going to draw a card. I don't know if there are 2 Bear Witchers left in the deck or just 1.
Yeah.
So that might be a card that needs to be played after Quen.
I do believe as well that the Scald has a ranged lock, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, correct.
That's come in recently. So you can actually play it on the front row, right? And it won't work. But of course, if there's a Morkvarg or a Skirm or anything like that, or even any golds, you prefer to actually use the discard here. But 7 points ahead for PorkBelly. He can taste Gwent open number 4, Christo. He's got 3 leader charges available, but there is a commando in the deck available still for Wlastelin, and a 6-point card. The Roach, obviously it is a gold, but really its value is in finding those commandos which are already on the board. So the Roach, definitely not worth the 12 provisions in this particular situation. And this is what happens if you answer Foltest. The power level in this short round 3 of the Commandos deck goes severely down the drain.
Well, Roche is going to play for 4, deal 2 damage, having an extra turn, could pop out another commando. So you're playing for 10 points. It's not the end of the world, but it's exactly, to your point, Speci, not exactly what you're hoping for here. Because you've got things like the Bear Witcher just comes down, does 8, and is going to heal for 2 more, and that does 10 as well. There's a pink for 2 damage. I imagine heat waving that is probably your best heat wave.
Yeah, it's an 8-point, right? It's an 8-point heat wave. You just clean up the Roach. I wonder if there was ever an argument here for Wlastelin to actually go for his assault first. He could use a ballista to just hit the Quen down and then get this death blow through. Decided not to go for it, and surprisingly somewhat as well, PorkBelly not taking the heat wave, but instead deciding to try and heat wave, or just getting rid of the heat wave here. Verification is going to play for 10 points. That does also make sense why he decided not to do it, right? He would have had an 8-point heat wave, but instead discards it and gets a 10-point verification. So giving himself a couple extra points. The Marine comes down. The Marine versus the big fat bear. There's only one winner here, Christo, and that is PorkBelly getting himself into Gwent Open number 4.
Verification just won the series. I just want to put that out there. We talked about it at the top, how excited we were to see verification come through, and it has happened. It has literally punched PorkBelly's ticket through to Gwent Open number 4.